Hey, P students, we're going to get you ready for the Unit 3 exam here. We're going to do some practice problems. So the best way to do these is to, obviously, anytime you're practicing problems with me, going to show you how to do them is to pause it, go ahead and take a shot at it on some scrap piece of paper. On this first one here, I'll go through and kind of do it. Let's do it together. And then the next two, maybe I'll kind of pause it and you can work on it, and then I'll show you the answers a little bit quicker. Okay, so there's three total. If you want to do all three of those before I get going, here is number 2, and here is number 3. So go ahead and pause those as needed. That is your situation. But let's start out with number 1 first, and especially if this is the first time you're doing this, we're going to, it's going to be something new for you. So first of all, we're going to cross off part D and part E. We haven't gotten to that stuff yet. Okay, so again, you can kind of see the way that they kind of meld different units together. Part D is Unit 4, and Part E is kind of Unit 4 and Unit 5. But anyway, let's go in order here. Okay, it says to show us our work, all that good stuff. You can find some of these practice problems on my AP. I just kind of cut and pasted them. So this is where we're starting. All right, so we're going to assume that our economy is in long run equilibrium. I got to get my full information that I need. So if you remember, long run equilibrium is going to be when all three of our lines are going to intersect each other. I'm going to draw this the best that I can. I'm going to make sure I label stuff. Aggregate demand. I've got short run aggregate supply. And I've got my long run aggregate supply. And they should all be intersecting there. I'll try to make that look a little bit better. Okay, so this is my price level axis. Want to make sure I do that. And this is my real GDP axis. All right. Now it says that we've correctly labeled everything. We've got the graph. We've got our our labels. Remember, we can also find the employment rate moving to the right on this bottom real GDP. I don't think we need it for this question, but we will maybe need it a little bit later. Okay, so we've got the long run aggregate supply curve. We've got that. Current equilibrium. Okay, we've got to label our output levels, and they say Y, E, and price level E. Okay, that's all that we've got to do there. If you put a little dotted line through there, that's completely fine to show some clarity, but you don't necessarily have to, okay? But I'm going to. I get picky. Okay, now we're going to assume that the government increases spending. Okay, so we're going to increase spending. We really don't care what they're increasing spending on. They're going to say national defense, and they're not going to raise taxes. Okay, so we've got increased spending. We know that when the government injects money into the economy, that it is going to affect our aggregate demand. Now, in this case, it's going to affect our aggregate demand, increase spending, putting more money in. We're going to increase our aggregate demand. Obviously, I have the fortunate of drawing with different colors just to kind of show, but you don't have to. I'm going to label that AD1, okay? So increased spending, more money in people's pockets. In this case, it's national defense type of people, but it could also be, factories that produce national defense stuff. So anyway, we have shown that effect on our graph. It says, how's this government action going to affect the unemployment rate in the short run? Okay, so as we said, from left to right, we know that this also represents employment. Okay, so if we go from 0% employment up, our employment increases. Well, read things carefully. Unemployment rate goes down. Okay, so decreases due to higher output levels. Okay, higher output levels. And you may be a little bit more wordy than me on those. I'm trying to limit how much I write with my bad handwriting on my screen. All right, but we know that higher output levels lead to higher employment percentages. Okay, so unemployment decreases. Make sure you're saying your words in the correct order. Sometimes that's how people get tripped up. All right. Now, next part here, we're going to assume that the economy adjusts to a new long run equilibrium. Okay. After the increase in government spending. So the increase in government spending, they don't ask you this, but it creates what we call this inflationary gap. Okay. And that's in our notes. But this is an inflationary gap. They don't let you necessarily, or they don't make you say that. Okay. But it's asking you what's going to happen in the long run. Well, in the long run, what's been created here is we also have, and again, it doesn't make us answer it, but we want to know that we have a new price level. Okay. And our price level has increased. Well, remember, price level also includes how much money people get paid. All righty. Well, getting paid and wages also go along with costs of inputs. Okay. So as we have this new equilibrium point here, we have increased costs of inputs. Those increased costs of inputs over a period of time are going to cause our short run aggregate supply curve to shift back. We've got to get back to this long run equilibrium point. And it might take some time. We don't know how long it's going to take. All right. And we're going to assume everything else stayed the same through all this. But we have a new long run equilibrium here. Again, the short run aggregate supply is shifting to the left due to higher production costs in the form of wages, okay, because people are making more money. And there's also inflation, so they're demanding more money as their wages too. So it's asking us to identify a new price level, okay, price level 2. We're going to put that there, okay. I explained that for number 1, again, higher wages, decrease supply. And again, you probably want to be a little bit more elaborate in what you say when you do that, but that should be pretty sufficient right there. Okay, and that's the answer that we should have. We've gotten everything covered. Again, make sure you're answering things, kind of in an order that's easy to grade. Again, I know mine's sloppy because we're on a graph. Email me with questions. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so same thing. Let's read the question here first. All right, so we've got a new economy called Anderson Land. It is also in long run equilibrium and also has full employment. All right. We're going to say that nominal wages are fixed in the short run. We can almost ignore that for right now. Anytime I get this, okay, I'm going to draw my graph regardless, but it does ask us to draw our graph as we get going here. So go ahead and get that done. If you haven't already paused and taken a shot at this whole entire problem, now is the time to do it. Okay. And we are going to do this whole entire problem here. Price level, real GDP. We got our output labeled Y1. That is our long run equilibrium. We've got our price level labeled PL1. All right. Check mark, check mark. Assume we have an increase in exports from Anderson Land. This increase in exports, that means we're sending more goods out. That means people are buying stuff from us. That means our GDP is going to increase. We've got the same kind of result from the last problem here, which that's okay. All right. And it says show the new price level with Y2 and PL2. So sorry, output level, Y2, price level, PL2. Okay, so we've got that point right there. All right. Based on your answer in part B, so we've check marked part B. Based on your answer part B, what is the impact of higher exports on real wages? Increase. Price level increased. Okay, and you might want to mention that a little bit more. Like I said, a little more detail there. But prices our increase in demand increases the price level. It's going to increase our wages as we produce more stuff. Okay, we've done that. As a result of the increase in Exports, export Anderson land. What's that going to do for ships? What's that going to do for aggregate demand? Um, aggregate demand. Okay, and we basically what we've done, we've got to look at this as investment. Okay, so new container ships and equipment. This is the types of business investment. A portion, okay, of the GDP. Sorry. Okay. So what's that going to do to aggregate demand? We're going to increase our aggregate demand again. All right. So we're going to assume that that's going to, it doesn't have us draw, but we're going to increase our aggregate demand. What is that going to do for the long run aggregate supply? None. It's not going to change it. Okay. Technology was not in, so the things that change our aggregate supply is technology, availability of resources. Our long run aggregate supply is not going to change. Okay. So I'm just going to add that in there. Tech was not improved and no new resources. All right. So that's your answer for number 2. Email with questions. Let's knock out this third one here. Okay, we're going to do this first part together. I'm going to pause it and let you kind of go through. So just like the other two, it gives us a scenario. Canada is in an open economy. It's currently in a recessionary output gap. We can cancel these last 3 here. Don't need to do those. If you took a shot on, you're like, what am I doing? That's completely fine. Don't do that bottom one. Okay, so anyway, we've got a recessionary output gap. So let's draw this first, and then you can go through and finish out, and I'll show you kind of the answers as you go. I'm going to draw it right here. I'm going to draw it up here. So we've got a recessionary gap. That means we are producing behind our long run aggregate supply. Make sure I'm labeling everything here. I'm kind of crammed. Okay, so this big thing here is our recessionary gap is going to be from this spot to that spot. Okay, it doesn't make us label it, but that is our recessionary gap right there. All right, let's label these for you before you take a shot on your own. We've got the current equilibrium real output as Y1, price level 1, and our full employment is YF. Okay, so remember our full employment is always on our long run aggregate supply. Go ahead, take a shot at the rest here. I'm going to fill it out. We'll talk about how we get to those answers as we fill that out. Okay, guys, we're back here. Let's talk about how we found these answers here. Okay, so we left you off. I'm going to cover this up. Remember, we're in a recessionary gap. Okay, so we left you off. We did our graph up here. So part B, it says the central bank, the government don't take any policy actions. We got to get into the long run. How do we get back to long run? Okay. What are we going to do? Well, SRAS is going to do the opposite as the second problem we did. We're going to shift right due to lower wages. Okay, I drew that up there. It didn't ask you to do that, but I'm showing you. What is that on your graph? Show how the economy adjusts to, I'm sorry, it did show us how to. It did tell us to do that. Explain it for part 1, show us for part 2. I've done that. Okay, again, the SRAS, short run aggregate supply, shifts back to the right because of lower wages, people eventually accepting them. Okay, I wrote that in there very sloppily. Now, it says for part C, we got to use our money multiplier. Okay, and a couple things you've got to remember about that is that as one person spends money, right, they're going to go spend it somewhere. Well, the person they gave it to, for whatever good or service they did, they're going to go spend it too. So the money's going to flow through the economy. So the one thing we got to remember that is that our marginal propensity to consume, okay, plus our marginal propensity to save, okay, is 0.8 over 0.2. And I have a typo here. Marginal propensity to save is 0.2. I wrote these wrong, so that should be a C. This should be an S. I apologize. All right. So 1 over MPS, and this is going to change over here too. I apologize. That's a C. I knew what I wanted to do. I just drew it wrong. Okay. So we're going to find the spending multiplier first. We're going to call that 5. Okay. Notice 1 divided by MPS equals 1 divided by 0.2 equals 5. The math will always be extremely easy for you. Okay. I also went ahead and did the tax multiplier just as a show of what we're doing too. Propensity to consume over save is 0.8 over 0.2, which is 4. You can also do the spending multiplier minus 1. It works both ways depending on what you're comfortable with. Okay, we've just got to solve a simple math equation here. 5 times x equals 40. If we're going to get us back to, all right, so we didn't want to wait for this. So remember, we're trying to get back to this spot. So we've got to increase aggregate demand. Well, if the federal government's going to do it, fiscal policy, they can either spend, that's our spending multiplier, they can tax. Okay, so if they spend, we're going to be in this spot here where we've got to take 40 divided by 5, trust my math, where x is going to be $8 billion. Okay, they've got to increase spending by $8 billion to cover this recessionary gap. Same thing, we've got to cut taxes, figure out this math, should be $10 billion to cover a $10 billion tax cut to cover that. I didn't mention, how do we know we have to make 40 billion? Well, our real output is 500 billion here. Our full employment output is 540 billion. That's where I got that 40 billion from. Okay, if you're kind of confused, if it's the first time you're seeing this. Hope you did great. We're going to have another set of problems here shortly in the next class period. So hopefully you're able to do a little bit better. Email with questions. Hope you're figuring this stuff out.